A few weeks ago, it made really big news. Some high-profile people, Bill Gates, Mike Zuckerberg, Obama, former President Obama, I think Jeff Bezos, several people on Twitter had sent out tweets saying, hey, donate to this cause and we'll match the money and let's do all this wonderful, great thing. Well, it turns out, of course, that these didn't occur, and sometimes if things sound too good to be true, they likely are. And I remember thinking at the time when this was making news about these accounts having been hacked, it's like, all these high-profile people that should know better about having what's called two-factor authentication, meaning, yes, they have passwords on their accounts, but they should have the code on the phone, the two-factor, so that something like this couldn't happen, that the account would be much harder to hack. Well, we've now got some more information. Just recently, a 17-year-old from Florida, along with a couple of others, were charged in this case. Now, it turns out they stole roughly about $100,000, a little over $100,000 with the scam. So it means some people did fall for it. Even if it sounds too good to be true, some people will act. I mean, we know that for every million pieces of spam email hackers send out, about 8 people respond. So there is money to be made in this situation. And something else that I've talked about in the past is why cybercrime. It's usually because it's very hard to be caught. Very low percentage of people get caught. Normally they get caught for one of two reasons. One, they've ticked off someone so big they've got pockets deep enough to fund an investigation across multiple spots, like a Microsoft or a Google or an Apple, whatever the case is. Or they're not very experienced. Well, it turns out in this case, this kid, 17, very smart apparently, and I'm going to walk you through what he did and how this occurred and how he got caught. But smartness in the computer world didn't turn out to be very smart with how he conducted himself after the fact. So how did it happen? Great question. Glad you asked. So this kid hacked into Twitter's Slack, one of the channels. So if you don't know what Slack is, it's like an instant messaging program. And in this day and age right now with the pandemic and people working remotely and having, Twitter, as you can imagine, has multiple offices around the world, they have to have some form of communication, some quick way to get information disseminated across the company. So they use a program called Slack. Very popular. That's out there. Well, this kid was able to hack into one of the Slack channels that Twitter uses, which means he was in the room and was able to read everything the Twitter staff were sending back and forth inside this channel. So he kind of had an open door and insight into what was going on at Twitter. And somebody at Twitter ended up posting an admin account and password for the back end of actual Twitter, which gave this kid access to get into the back end setup. So basically, in simple terms, he was able to bypass the security and get directly into the accounts. But he didn't know what to do with them and how to actually leverage them. So the kid went on something called the dark web. You've heard me talk about that before. If you haven't, you can go back and listen to some of the early episodes. But in short, the dark web is the Amazon and eBay and message board communication of bad guys and those that are trying to do things out of sight. See, the dark web is very hard to get to, but it's not impossible. And law enforcement's getting in there, and people that are called white hats, which would be IT folks that are, it's kind of like, if you remember the old Westerns, the bad cowboys used to always wear black hats. The good cowboys wear the white hats. Well, white hat IT people will get into the dark web, and they'll be looking around. So this kid ends up on the dark web on a message board going, hey, and he pretended to be someone from Twitter, a disgruntled employee that had this back-end access. He says, I've got this, but I'm not sure how to leverage it, how to make some money on it. Basically, is what the kid was saying. He was like, hey, I got this, now what do I do? And some people on this message board, and when you think of message board, it's kind of like Facebook Messenger or a messenger app, but there's a whole bunch of people And what turns out is law enforcement also happened to be, or was able to get into, this same message board, and they were able to grab some screenshots, which is ultimately how they started tracing people down and charge them. So we get on the message board and said, hey, I got this access. Somebody responded pretty quick saying, oh yeah, prove it. Kid did. He was able to go into that person's Twitter handle and manipulate the account. But now we've got Conspirator 2's Twitter handle. That's, the bad guy, or the law enforcement was able to get that Twitter handle. So everything started to unravel once they found this. So the kid hacks Slack. The internal employees at Twitter made a questionable decision about posting or pinning credential information to the back end inside of Slack, which is not an encrypted communication form, probably not best practice, and I would think that Twitter now has changed that practice and made sure that that kind of communication of important information is done encrypted and securely and not in such a form. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to learn from your mistakes, right? So the kid gets into the Twitter, or gets into Slack, finds the information that's loosely given out, how to get on the back end. From the back end, he goes on the dark web, says, hey, I got this access, now what do I do? And a couple of people come up and say, hey, let's do this scam. And they knew how to manipulate or do some of this funding. The sad part is, if you stop and think about it, this kid, he's been charged. I'm pretty confident that law enforcement has got this figured out, that this is who it is, all for $100,000. $100,000 sounds like a lot of money. Probably not enough money to throw your life away and end up in prison for several years. Does show the kid's kind of brilliant. How do you get into the Slack account to begin with? I'm not sure how to hack a Slack account. I'm sure the information is out there. If you get in the dark web and go looking, you can probably find it to do it. But bottom line was, Twitter wasn't really hacked from the outside. Yes, one of the communication channels was through Slack, but Twitter itself was not hacked. They kind of gave up the keys to the kingdom. And that's how easy it can be for you to run into some problems with cybersecurity if you're not being careful about how you pass along sensitive information or how you keep that sensitive information within your company. So let's all learn a lesson from Twitter. Let's not be posting critical information that is, as we say, in plain language. It's not encrypted. It's if someone gets it, they can read it. Let's not be doing that. And make sure that you got your two-factor on. Now, in this case, it would not have helped those Twitter accounts because they had back-end access and got around all the security. It allowed them to pretend to be those people. So in this case, it wouldn't have helped, but it will help you a lot to make sure that you got your two-factor turned on so that hopefully you don't end up becoming a victim of a cyber criminal and then them trying to pretend to be you. So thanks for your time today. Hopefully you're able to pick up a few lessons that Twitter has learned the hard way, and stay safe out there.